you're me. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to be here and join us to learn a little bit more about MTSS and the Inflexion approach. As you all probably know, crowdsource is our opportunity that we have to get together and talk amongst ourselves for school leaders to hear about real world work of exceptional schools and exceptional administrators. We hope that you'll find inspiration and practical tips on how to transform the student experience in your schools. We do have a webinar format going on today, where at any point during the presentation, please feel free to type questions that you have into the chat. Lydia and I will funnel those along to our presenter, Dr. Matt Coleman. And we will have time at the end for questions, at which point you can raise your hand, or it looks like join as a panelist. Is that correct as well, Lydia? Thanks. Okay, great. So we will have some of that time along the way, but if something burning question comes up as we're going along and you don't want to forget it, please feel free to drop it into the chat. It is my pleasure to introduce Matt Coleman from Inflexion, the presenter extraordinaire. My name is Tracy Buslow. Most of you know me. I'm a research associate, a Portico facilitator, and Matt Coleman was my supervisor in Springfield public schools many years ago, and also as an instructor. So it's with pleasure to introduce him today to everyone to talk to us about MTSS. So take it away, Matt.
Thanks, Tracy. And when she says an instructor, I know I did not have her as a high school or middle school student, I don't think. I think that was at the U of O probably, but okay, just checking. There are way too many people on here that are going to be able to check me. So if I get going, I say some outlandish things, I'm confident you're gonna keep me in my lane. But I appreciate everybody being here. We were joking earlier, I probably could talk about this topic for about 17 hours. And I'd enjoy every minute of it. I don't know that anybody else would, but I appreciate y'all being here, and we're going to get rolling. What we're going to do is look at the intersection of MTSS within the Inflexion approach. And we're going to really kind of be rolling through. And I noticed we've got a blend of school admin and coaches. I'd love for you to hold a school in your head as I go through this presentation, because there's going to be some questions to ask at the school level. So if you're a coach, think about one of the schools that you've been working with. If you are an administrator or teacher leader, obviously think about your own school. So ready or not, here we go. Bottom line is we put the Inflexion approach together about 7 or 8 years ago, and our engagement with MTSS has come in many forms. Obviously, our connection to the University of Oregon, where a lot of things connected to PBIS and Reading First, and a lot of different initiatives that really were the precursors to, in my mind, to a multi-tiered systems. That's part of what we grew out of as an organization, and that has definitely informed our work. But just for some of you, you may not know, over about the last 7 years, we've been involved in the California MTSS project. And that's ultimately, I think they're up anywhere from $60 to $75 million coming from the state, supporting MTSS implementation across the state. As part of this work, I'm thinking about Sam and Christina and who are down in California specifically. We were able to work with Martin Luther King Junior High and with Rancho Minerva as part of the MTSS work that we were doing with the state of California. We were asked to come along for the ride because the California model was based on the Swift Center's model at the University of Kansas. And the Swift Center had only done K-8. And so we kind of came on with a very much our secondary expertise in the secondary lens. So we've been immersed in this work for 6 or 7 years, and there's going to be a set of questions that are asked in different areas of the Inflexion approach that are part of what the state of California uses, which is called the school implementation tool for MTSS. We helped facilitate the development of the tool about 4 years ago now, and it's based on our approach, the Inflexion approach. So let's dive into the specifics. Back to the macro. Most of you, and probably every single person on this call, knows that the Inflexion approach really hinges on this idea that you've got two anchors. You've got your identity and your vision for readiness. And that what you're looking for in the inflection approach is that your identity should inform the structures that support the approaches to learning that empower students in terms of your vision for readiness. This next slide really breaks down the different component parts. And so when you look at shared identity, obviously it's the two anchors or the two biggest blocks in this visual, but connected to shared identity very, very tightly is this idea of inclusive leadership and shared purpose. Obviously, shared vision for readiness kind of sits on its own here in the end game, which we'll discuss that here in a bit. The approaches to learning, the kind of the critical components, you've got universal practices in classic tier 1 type language in terms of classic MTSS. Additional supports would be tier 2, tier 3, or strategic and intensive. Student empowerment, elevated student voice, and you can see equitable access and equitable programs. The structures you can see there, and I'm thinking that's purple. And I'm not going to read through them all, but you can get a sense of what they all are. What we're going to focus on today is really looking at shared vision for readiness and shared identity, and all of them that are totally lit up. So shared mental models, relationship supporting structures, and then universal practices, additional supports, equitable access, and both equitable access, individual and programmatic. And we're going to dive into those, and we're going to get going right now. So apologize for my lingering talk. So here's the first, the two anchors is where it starts. And unfortunately for many schools, when they go to implement MTSS, it's actually where it ends, because they don't do the kind of work they need to do to create the shared set of values and beliefs and mental models. Many of these slides are going to have these statements. And so under identity, our shared identity reflects the values, beliefs, and understandings of our entire community. What I want you thinking about is that one side, whether, again, it's the school you're at, or whether it's a school you're working with a principal, or a school that you're leading. Those are statements about a school that has a shared identity. Those statements are going to be true. The example here, just to illustrate this idea of shared values and shared beliefs and shared identity, is from actually Forest Grove School District. And you can see that the statements there: we care deeply, we stand strong, we adapt and grow. Those are value laden. The we implies what we think of as the power of the collective. It's not about what Tracy or Lydia or I do individually. It's about what we do together. And then you can see, in terms of caring deeply, it gets at having communities that are empathetic, where collaboration is primary. With the stand strong, this idea of developing kids that are resilient and responsible, and this idea of adapting and growing around critical thinking and communication. That outside circle in this visual represents a part of a school's identity, which is their shared purpose. And that is what Forest Grove is committed to developing in all kids. And we'll get into this a little bit more, but I can't stress enough how important shared identity is. And what's interesting is that you can see the one component part here. Our shared identity includes a clear sense of purpose, and specifically a holistic set of outcomes for all students. The visual you see there is the 4 keys. Our founder is an organization, David Conley, who pretty much a lifetime researching the concept of what it means to be college and career ready, develop these 4 keys. And what's unique about them is that it really takes everything. I use an example. Unfortunately, I am in San Diego, and my 2 boys are with me. I can say this about my 24-year-old. He didn't pass a class at the U of O. He did not pass a class. Yet when he got into the U of O, he had about a 3.6, 3.7 GPA, transcript full of AP courses, scored in the top 1 percentile on the ACT in reading and writing, and top 1 percentile. And he did not pass a class at the U of O. And he did not pass a class because he did not have fully developed ACT and GO skills. If I were to look at it in the context of my son Griffin in Forest Grove, this resilience and responsibility, the ability to stand strong, is where he really was lacking. And it cost him in terms of success at the next level. And ultimately, as I mentioned, that he dropped out. One of the things that I think is critical to know, I mean, this is where MTSS begins. What is your shared purpose? Now, part of that is, and you see it in there, it needs to be holistic. What we know about college readiness, about career readiness, and most importantly about life readiness, it takes equal amounts of think, know, act, and go to actually be ready, and schools are responsible for it. And that's for elementary. Elementary gets it. Many of the folks that are on are secondary. Secondary was not designed in this way. It was not designed for individuals to be developed as a whole child. And so for a lot of folks, when we start talking about MTSS, one of the first things we need to talk about is this shared purpose and whether or not you have a shared set of outcomes that are holistic. Next piece, and this is, there's a part of identity that can be a little bit confusing, but it's this idea of mental models. And those are really shared ways of seeing the world. Two of them are represented on the screen right here. One is the idea of moving from me to we. I say this all the time. It's about the power of the collective. I'll pick on Pittsburgh High and ask that Sam, whose kids go to Pittsburgh High, doesn't tell Pittsburgh High that I was picking on them. But when I first went to Pittsburgh High, they have 3,700 kids in their school. And I was into 8 classrooms. And 4 of them were 4 of the best classrooms I've ever seen. The other 4 are not so much. But 4 of them were just absolutely out of this world. They were amazing. The issue, and when I came out into the hallway, I was talking to the principal and the assistant principal. The issue was I felt like I could have been in 4 different schools. There was not a shared language. Was not shared rituals and routines. There was not a shared universal and evidence of a universal. It was great instruction. It was great relationally. The teaching was amazing. Kids were learning. I'm not suggesting that it was bad at all, except for the fact that they were not leveraging the power of the collective. There was not continuity between, and again, whether it be shared language, shared rituals and routines, et cetera. So this idea of power of the collective, if you're going to implement an MTSS model, you have to be kind of churning that. It's tilling the soil is the way I think about it. You got to be tilling the soil on that, and you got to get people to kind of embrace that it's about me in terms of my own individual responsibility, but it's about leveraging the collective. The second one as a mental model is every kid gets what they need, when and how they need it. That was the shared understanding of what we meant by equity when I was principal at Westview High School. And whenever equity came up, that everybody on staff and within our community knew that's what it meant. We were going to get kids what they needed, when and how they needed it. And you can see on the right, in one of the questions, our school community shares an understanding of core concepts, equity, SEL, trauma-informed, et cetera. It's so critical. You don't need 42 shared understandings, but you need to have a shared understanding of some of the bigs. Number of times I've asked people, large groups, how many of you believe SEL is important and social emotional learning is something you're responsible for? People raise their hand. So keep your hands up if your school actually shares an understanding of what you mean by SEL. Hands would come down. Most hands would come down. Having these shared understandings is critical. And from a perspective of MTSS, the power of the collective is one of them. I would argue equity is another. I think elements of trauma-informed, SEL, making sure that we collectively know what we all mean when we're talking about these big ideas is critical. And most schools don't do that very well. They don't define these things explicitly. All right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to talk about this last one, and then I'm going to take some questions if there are any questions. The last piece is vision for readiness, and this really is linked to shared purpose. But what you see, and this is, again, it's up from Pittsburgh. I was up there just yesterday. They are developing really these statements of outcomes. They want confident, courageous, productive kids who are team players. And again, you can see the explicit outcomes. The reason vision for readiness is so important, and just to give you some historical context, the literature on the research around school change in the last 30 years identified one of the key factors in schools that actually transform is this idea of they have a consensus of outcomes. Now, stated in the negative, what the research has found that probably the biggest factor that has limited school change is what they call, what they identify as a lack of consensus of outcomes. And I'll tell you, we've probably seen hundreds and hundreds of specifically secondary sites, some elementary also, but particular secondary. This was true in the elementaries that we've seen. There's a lack of shared vision for readiness. There's a lack of shared outcomes. The social studies department idea of their vision for readiness is different than the English department, is different than PE. All of those are different than athletics or the performing arts. That's typically what you see. And the way that we often say is that, you know, secondary, specifically secondary, you have a lot of independent contractors working independently. That does not work. And the whole idea of a multi-tiered system hinges on universal. It hinges on what are we all doing collectively every period, every day. And that's the piece that that Rancho is working specifically on, is really trying to define that. And I'll show you some other examples related to work they're doing. When I say this at the elementary level, we are working with elementary schools, and you see differences between what the first, second, third grade teachers have for a sense of vision for readiness versus the fourth and fifth graders. I had twins, and they were never in the same class. We never wanted them in the same class. And this is a school that will remain nameless in Eugene, but they, my kids had some really different experiences. They had some grade bands where it was lockstep, and you could just tell the teachers totally worked off each other and worked with each other. That was 2 of their 5 years or 6 years. 2 of their 6 years was lockstep. The others, I mean, we had some pretty wildly different experiences with 2 kids going through in 2 different classrooms at the same time. So this is a big deal, and both identity and vision for readiness are 2 anchors that often when people think about MTSS, they don't start there. They start with some of the other structural stuff that and learning and approaches to learning stuff that I'll get into here in a bit. This is, and we say this with anything you're trying to do in a school, this is where you start. You've got to ground yourself as a school in a shared identity and a shared vision for readiness. So I'm gonna quit talking for a second, and just ask if there's any specific questions on these 2, identity and vision for readiness. Man, Kate Bark is joining from Palm Desert. Kate, you're from Oregon. You should know better than throwing that out there for the Oregonians that are on the call. It's not supposed to be sunny in Oregon until like next week. All right, I'm hearing nothing. So y'all working on something else, you know, with just this thing open, listen to this wah go on, or that first part was, I bet it is gorgeous up there. That first part is not new news, and I know it's not new for a lot of folks. So let's take a look at the next pieces. Oops. So I would argue this and would challenge a lot of people out there right now, and people have great respect for. It's like, can you tell me what's happening every period, every day in your system? And Shirley, I'll pick on you a little bit. The Beaverton School District specifically. What's happening across Southridge High School, Westview High School, Sunset High School, Mountainside High School, Beaverton High School. I'm sure I forgot one, and same at the middle school level. And I would even build the argument even across the elementaries. What is happening every day in classrooms in terms of supporting the holistic development of kids, or development of kids towards a holistic set of outcomes? At the secondary level, often you can't answer that. People talk about doing MTSS, and where we believe it starts and in some ways finishes is what you're doing or not doing universally. And so, you know, a lot of folks want to talk, you know, RTI, and a lot of times when MTSS comes up, it's all focused on the secondary and tertiary, the tier 2, tier 3 interventions. If you aren't linking what you're doing at tier 2 and tier 3 explicitly to what's happening at tier 1, you're not going to get the effect you're looking for. I would suggest, if you say you're champion for equity and you have not built out a universal approach that utilizes elements of what's called targeted universalism, where you actually identify What are we going to focus universally that supports our kids who are furthest from opportunity, both in terms of playing to their strengths, but also then addressing maybe their weaknesses? If you're not doing that stuff universally, you're not getting after equity. And I'll pick on the state of Oregon a little bit. There's been a push over many, many, many years to provide resource for secondary and tertiary supports that are culture responsive, sustaining, et cetera. And yeah, I applaud that. I'm not saying that's not bad. It's great. But what there hasn't been is a corresponding investment in, and I don't necessarily mean money, but I mean in focus and time and energy on what isn't or isn't happening universally every period, every day, that links to what's happening in those tier 2 and tier 3. This, and you can see our universal practices are designed to ensure every student feels a sense of belonging, connection, engagement, aligned with our shared vision for readiness. The belonging, connection, and engagement is something that we as an organization become even, and certainly I become very hyper fixated on. I've got a daughter who did not complete high school and is hopefully working on her GED today. We'll see. But she's a great kid. She's a brilliant kid. But long story short, when I think about her progression to dropping out, she just didn't stop learning one day. She actually stopped feeling like she belonged, which caused her to feel like she wasn't connected, which caused her to quit engaging, which caused her to ultimately drop out, stop learning and drop out. And we look at it and go, well, gosh, we actually can measure simply by asking kids whether or not kids feel like they belong, feel accepted for who they are, whether or not they feel connected, they actually feel cared for, and whether or not they are engaged. So part of your universal practices needs to be really elevating those as outcomes. And I would argue, again, if you're doing equity work, specifically in the MTSS space, you should be gathering this kind of information. We would argue gathering this kind of information systematically so that you're seeing if how you're trying to intervene is actually having the desired effect. And as you look to intervene, in this particular case, it's really about belonging, connection, engagement as a form of an outcome. I asked the group of principals in Vista when we started using these types of surveys in Vista. Christina DeSanto can attest to this, who's on the call, that the question I asked was, who has belonging, connection, and engagement as an explicit outcome on their syllabi? Does anybody? Who's responsible for it? And the answer gets into the meat of we all should be. And that should be a focus. So that should be part of universal practices. Let me push ahead. So this is work that's happening right now in Vista. And this is an example from Vista. We have the example for Rancho. I was just up working with Rancho's staff on this yesterday, Rancho Madonnas, which is not Rancho Minerva. Madonnas is in Pittsburgh. Minerva is where Christina's at in Vista. But they want, as part of their whole set of outcomes, they want confident kids. And you can see the descriptor of what it means to be confident. What this reflects, these are identified as the look-fors. So if you were to walk into a classroom and you're looking for evidence that kids' confidence building is at play, these are some of the things that you'd be looking for. That's what the check marks are. Second slide here are the little things and the key moves that teachers in Vista use to develop confident kids. And I just give you a second to kind of read and take a look at some of these. This came from staff. We had over 100 teachers provide input, and we're in the process of continuing to develop this. And this is specific to the secondary level. I am confident in talking with their assistant soup that they're going to be looking to do similar. They're going to create a similar playbook at the elementary around confident kids. They want kind, confident, curious, and connected kids are kind of their 4 holistic statements or vision. They're part of their shared vision for readiness. Now, what it leads to are tools like this, where this is just a classic little instructional rounds or walkthrough tool, where you are looking for these things. And the big idea is that this is part of an instructional playbook. And The input has come from teachers based on the outcomes that they've identified, their shared vision for readiness. And this instructional playbook is what, if I were asked the question and I'm in Vista, what's happening every period, every day? My response would be teachers are utilizing the playbook and we're building kind, confident, curious, and connected kids. One of the ways from a measure, we think of as measures of systemic responsibility to measure whether that's happening or not, is these types of look for tools that are aligned with it. This is what it takes, not this specifically, but to get intentional around what's happening every period, every day, or all day, every day. If you're thinking about it at the elementary level, you've got to have this type of focus on what it means to engage in universal practices. Questions on that? Any of this? Seeing none, hearing none, I'm gonna keep rolling. Thank you, Christina. The scholars' feedback from the surveys have been amazing, and that is a component part of what we're looking to fold in. And when I say we and fold in, specifically in Vista and in Rancho, and everywhere. But the idea that I mentioned it came from the teachers. I didn't mention that we're asking the kids. Think about a teacher that's developed confidence in you, and again, confidence being defined in the way that it is. What are the little things that teacher did to develop the confidence in you? And looking to be very intentional, and back to the idea of targeted universalism, we're working to identify groups of students that have been historically underserved and looking for their responses and really elevating their responses in terms of the actual playbook. So excellent. All right. Let's talk expansive opportunities and take a look again at the student opportunities that support or align with our vision for readiness. A range of large group, small group, individual. That's again classic kind of RTI, and this is we like to say expansive opportunities rather than tier 1 or tier 2 or strategic and intensive. Those are expansive opportunities, and those should be included. But we think about the entire school day and every part of a kid's school day and every little piece that could be considered something that is in addition to. And so you can see include both in-school and out-of-school opportunities, and then opportunities developed to provide to meet the unique needs, interests, and identities of our students. I love this visual. I'm going to just give some shout outs to some amazing school leaders. The mariachi band is at Springfield High School. And if you're familiar with Lane County, the fact that Springfield High, if you would have said 15 years ago, would be one of the first schools in the state to have a mariachi band, you would have been like, hell no, that ain't happening. Not at Springfield High. The reason that happened was because an amazing principal, Carmen Gilman, who many people know. Carmen saw the need, and specifically from an opportunity developed and tried to meet the unique needs, interests, and identities of her students. She went to the band director and said, "Hey, I've got an idea." He's like, "I've never taught it, but let's go." And they've done an amazing, it's been an amazing program. It's probably been in place now 10, 12 plus years. The idea is it's an expansive opportunity specifically for a group of students who often, and certainly at Springfield High School, were marginalized, had been marginalized prior to Carmen getting there. It was part of a multi-pronged effort to really engage kids in different ways and to create connections in different ways. And when she got there, when she became principal, not when she got there, she was VP there before, when she became principal, the dropout rate at Springfield High for Latinx students specifically was almost double the state average. When she left, it was below the state average for all kids. And actually the group with the highest dropout rate at Springfield High when she left were actually white boys, which bothered her because it was time to get after the white boys that we weren't serving well. And the overall school dropout rate was lower than the state. She did unbelievable work there. But a big part of it was her thinking about expansive opportunities in a way that really was around, let's look at different groups of students and get after them. And get after getting them things that really connected to who they are. This picture at the top, that's actually Ethan, who is he's now an assistant superintendent in Salem Kaiser, was at that time the principal at Cottage Grove, and prior to that worked with Tracy in the Springfield schools and worked with us in the Springfield schools back in the day. I don't know how he got it through risk management. Maybe it was like, shh, don't tell. But he started a boxing club because he had kids that liked to throw down a little bit. And they had very clear expectations about how the kids needed to be in school if they were going to get to participate in the after school boxing club. And so a subset of kids, a relatively small group of kids, but had big needs in terms of just not feeling connected to school. They were more than willing to toe the line during the day to have access to the gym. And he's a boxer. And so, there's some great images. But again, that's this mindset of what are we going to do? I'll give you a little example from my class. And Joanne, I think, is on the call. I think we did this together when she was a VP at Mountain View and I was principal there. We actually started a skate club because we had skaters that were tearing shit up in the community at site. And so we got with the local community and specifically the strip mall across the street from us and built out a skate park, essentially a little skate park in our back for it. We did get that cleared through risk management. We had lots of forms the kids had to fill out. But it was the same idea. It's like, give them something that it allows them to see that we recognize who they are as a group of students. But then we could leverage it to help them stay focused during the day so that they had access to it via the after school programming. The last example is a guy named Mark Jackson, who runs an organization called REAP in the greater Portland area. Westview High School, we suspended or expelled 44% of our African and African-American students the year before I came on board. And when I came on board, got a group of people together. Shoji Shigioka, who many of you know, was an amazing counselor. She is a big part of this. We created a focus, and we got very specific with different leadership groups. And we contracted with Mark to support our African-American. It ended up being African and African-American because we had really two unique groups. We had Africans that were, for the most part, Somali, that had recently immigrated to the US. And then we had kids who were born in the US, African-American students. And amazing work that Mark and the kids that you see there did at Westview High School. But again, that was this idea of an expansive opportunity. Don't get me wrong, there are strategic and intensive needs, and when you think about expansive opportunities, that kind of the classic, the mental health support and the math support and the reading support, all of those things, we were doing that too. But this illustrates, and this is meant to really illustrate this idea, when you think about expansive opportunities, we're thinking about more than just the traditional ways that we think about what it means to strategically or intensively support kids. Going to keep rolling. Equitable access, individual. When you identify, think about Wheatland High School right now, which is up outside of Sacramento. They want kids to be confident, capable, and connected. And they've got specific outcomes for them. We've identified those outcomes, and we're in the process right now of mapping all the different universal, strategic, and intensive opportunities that are available to them. This is an example from another school, and we mapped against the 4 keys. But the idea is that they're looking for where their holes are in terms of how they've defined being confident, capable, and connected. And that's an important piece. I mean, if you're strategic and intensive from an MTSS perspective, if you're going to do and engage in strategic and intensive efforts, they need to link to your universal. Wheatland, we're also building the same kind of playbook. That's where we're going to look to make these explicit links. It forces people to rethink a little bit. What is this intervention about? And how can we connect it to what is happening in every period, every day? And so that's the work that's happening there. these 4 steps, and this is an important piece for people to kind of latch onto. People say they want to do MTSS, and RTI, which kind of came before and is certainly a part of MTSS. There's 4 there's 4 pieces that have to play off each other that you have to have, and you have to have all 4. You need to have a structure for time and space. And this, again, this is equitable access in terms of individual kids. So you've got to have a place where you're actually figuring out, well, what is it the kids need and what do we have to offer and how, how and what, I think I said equity is what kids need, when and how they need it, in terms of getting them what they need, when and how they need it. You've got to have a structure in terms of time and space. You've got to have a place where that is being considered. The second piece is you got to have decision rules and you got to have decision processes to use in that structured space to make decisions about how kids are getting placed into supports, and then how they're working their ways out of those supports in terms of they're not going there forever, they're getting intensive support forever. The idea is that you're supporting them so that they can evolve essentially and develop and no longer need that kind of support. You need good information, data, evidence connected to the whole child. I go back to my daughter. We didn't really ever in the IEP process, specific disability and math, we would talk about strengths, but it was almost like that perfunctory kind of, okay, that's how we start a conversation. They weren't strengths in relationship to what Churchill High School or South Eugene High School or Philomath High School. She went to a few high schools. We were trying to find a right fit. They weren't strengths in terms of what's Churchill trying to develop in all kids, what's South Eugene trying to develop in all kids. That's not how it was laid out. We talked about her strengths in generalities, and it really usually had no bearing on the decisions that were made, because we didn't gather any other type of information outside of kind of where she was at in relationship to how she was doing in school. I'm talking about the IEP process specifically. So you need good information. You need to know where kids are at in terms of belonging, connection, engagement. You need to have a sense of where their strengths are and how your decisions are going to play to their strengths. The last piece is then you need a range of supports. You need your expansive opportunities. You need to know what the possibilities, very similar to what was mapped in this example. You need to know what they are, so that as you're in that time and space, going through a decision-making process that's being driven by the student's strengths and the challenges that you're trying to support her or him or they in, you then can make that decision of identifying what the range of support is that they might need. Just highlight this, and this is something that folks in down south, they want to say down south, up north from me right now, but in Vista are playing with and using. It's a data system called IntelliSpark, but they ask these questions routinely, 2 or 3 times a year. Kids are being asked about belonging. They're being asked about connection. They're being asked about engagement. You can also see there's an SEL survey that's in there that Castle built with a district in Nevada that the kids are responding and self-reflecting. This, what are you passionate about? It's a series of 9 questions, and they show on this obviously they call this the student hub. They show the one that you're passionate about. It's at your fingertips. That's this idea of gathering information. Universal, you get into, and a part of MTSS model is universal screeners. Some of this plays into that, where this particular kid doesn't identify low, but when a kid has identified, let's say, a low sense of belonging, or you can see connection was moderate, let's say that was low, it's going to show up and actually get pushed out to somebody connected to this kid, so that they can respond. It's a form of universal screeners. All right, so let's talk equitable programs. Mentioned this already, so I'm not going to spend too much time with this, but again, this is all from the Springfield School District and Springfield High School. And again, I mentioned the mariachi band. You can see the stage and a play going on at Springfield High School. The Academy of Arts and Academics, A3, Academy of Arts and Academics. in Springfield. You can see just the general, probably some kind of band at Springfield High, and then the girls basketball team winning one of many state championships they've won over the last 10 years. The reason I show this is that in Springfield, and this Tracy can attest to this, and Mike Donnelly can attest to this, back in the 2008, 9, 10, when we were having issues financially, everybody was, from the recessions. When we went to cut, we had to cut. I mean, we absolutely, I think we cut 20% of our budget over a 2 or 3 year period. And we prioritized based on this idea of every student and graduate prepared for a bright and successful future. But part of the identity of our community that was known is that we valued the whole child. We valued the comprehensive high school experience, which meant we valued the arts, both the applied. It's a little visual here is from an unbelievable wood shop. Scott Touche is the teacher extraordinaire there. Unbelievable what they do. We valued all of those things. So when it came time to cut, many places, I'll pick on Salem, were cutting CTE programs. Other places were cutting the performing arts. We didn't do that in Springfield. We hung on to programs that met the unique needs of lots of different kids. And a lot of times that lives in your co and extracurricular programming. And so when we think about equitable access, there's a programmatic component of it. It's like, what is the breadth of it? All of these play into this idea of expansive opportunities, because all of these different learning environments are unique and play into building the whole child, building that graduate that's ready to walk off into the world. And so when you think about equitable access in terms of programs, this is something you have to think about. One of the biggest challenges we had, because we had to cut, I mean, it wasn't like anything went untouched, but there were two key decisions to illustrate this point. And one I think we'd go back and do a little bit differently. We cut a CTE program, specifically at Springfield High School, that had a higher concentration of girls in it. And what ended up happening, and I don't think we were thoughtful enough in that process, is that in subsequent years, there were much higher concentrations of boys in the CTE programs that didn't get cut. And I believe, you have to check on this, but I believe that they were intentional in adding things back with the state investment in the SIA dollars, in terms of really making sure that they had a range of CTE programs they'd supported that met the interests of the broad range of kids. The other piece that I would throw out there, just as an example, during that same recession, we chose, and I took a ton of heat from the ADs at the high school at Thurston High and Springfield High. We chose not to cut middle school athletics. And we got into a very unique partnership with Willamette Lane, the Parks and Rec District. We kept paying for coaches, we kept paying for busing. And that came in this idea of equitable access. And from a decision-making standpoint, we knew that there were a lot of kids who, if they did not have programming, I'm thinking about Hamlin Middle School specifically, Springfield Middle specifically, if they did not have programming that happened right after the school day and there was transportation provided, those kids would not have participated because their families couldn't get them to and from, either in terms of having to pay for it, in terms of outsourcing, but then the transportation was the biggest issue. And that's this idea of targeted universalism. When you make those kind of decisions, you're thinking about the kids furthest from opportunity and making sure that the universal part is access to co and extracurricular programming at the middle school is great for all kids. But you need to make sure that you're doing it in a way to where kids that are furthest from opportunity are going to be able to actually access it. And that's the idea of targeted. Those were strategic decisions that I know I personally took a lot of heat on. And I had a great relationship with the two ADs, and they got it, but they were still frustrated because we were cutting other parts, we're cutting coaching stipends, et cetera. But those are the kind of decisions that when you're in an MTSS frame of mind, you need to be thinking about in the context of access in terms of programmatic access. All right, I told you guys I can talk. Madison Middle School, this actually is where Christina Santo is, different school in her district. So another way to think about equitable access, what the big idea, and I think I remember, I might get this a little bit wrong with Christina on the line here, but when they took these surveys, I remember Christina, I want to say it was had identified 60 or 70 kids that had low levels of connection. And this survey really gets at it. I mean, these are actual kids, and we just map their sense of belonging, connection, and engagement, as well as their self-reflection around their self-awareness and their ability to self-manage. And what you can see in this slide is the group on the right represented 500 or 600 kids that had no Fs. And so on average, they had 3.5 high, they had on average, they had a GPA of 3.32 and attendance rates of 92%. On the left were kids that actually had an F, and on average, they had 2.3 Fs. They, on average, had a 1.8, and that was about 200 kids. This visual representation is 20 different kids that were randomly selected out of that group, just to illustrate it. Bottom line is that when you start to pull data in this information, both from an individual perspective, but also from an MTSS perspective, from a programmatic perspective as well, you can take a look at, okay, who are we reaching, who are we not reaching, and then strategically, what do we do? What's our response? Just a different example. This another example. This actually is something we're working on, and Trace is going to help us do it right. But we're looking at building a survey. So if you want to develop kind kids, and these are the little things, these little things get identified as elevated that you want to see in every classroom, every period, every day, we're going to build a survey to ask kids whether or not they're actually experiencing that. And so, and you can see the way that the question is laid out. You know, I'll use the one example: small wins and successes have been recognized in all of my classes, more than half of my classes. There'll be another prompt in there. C will actually be exactly half of my classes, less than half of my classes, or none of my classes. And that's a survey that Vista this next year across their 4 kind, confident, curious, and connected kids. They're going to be asked this 2 or 3 times a year. And the idea is, if Christina's at Rancho Minerva, she gets it back, and she looks and says, oh, we're doing a great job with kind, we're doing a great job with confident, but we're not doing a great job with curious. The idea is the system would then respond, and they would go to their playbook and identify, okay, what can we do universally to up our game in terms of focusing on developing curious kids, because it's an important outcome. Last thing, I promise, is this concept of relationship supporting structures. And you know, the bottom line, you can see in some of the questions, I mean, PLCs are a great example, because when we talk about relationship supporting structures, we're also talking about how are we bringing the adults together. The example that I'm illustrating here in terms of comes back from my blast from my past at Westview. When I got to Westview, we had 2,700 kids that basically was your classic comprehensive high school, where, you know, the luck of how the school schedule came together, you'd be reshuffling kids every period. You know, we were in a 8-period block schedule, so every day there was four class periods. Long story short, so we had 2,700 kids, and essentially we had no like teaming or house structure. So long story short, we went to a house and teaming structure. So we broke up into 3 houses. We signed an assistant principal to each one. We signed a counseling team of 2 to each. We assigned special ed to actually 2 special ed teachers to each house. And we assigned EL. We didn't have the concentration to go across all, so we had to concentrate it into 2 of the 3 houses. What you can see is that as kids were then in a house had 900 kids. In the 9th and 10th grade, we teamed English and social studies. And you can see the little asterisk. We had embedded weekly collaboration at the 9th and 10th grade level. So once a week, the English teachers and social studies teacher would come together with the VP, counselors, special educators for 9th and 10th grade, and would meet. They didn't meet necessarily every week, but it was at least every other week. They had the time to engage in embedded collaboration around the 90 kids that they shared. That was the time and space that I referenced earlier. You have to have the time and space. We had a very explicit process that they walked through. And if the kids, they looked at what can we do within our team to address the kids' needs, kind of within the universal, if you will. And when it got to the point where, okay, we need more help, the providers would be called into the team. They'd be part of the team then, which is a lot different than, oh, well, let me send this issue, down to the counseling office or down to the SPED office, and that was intentionally designed that way. But that was the structure in the space. We did not do the kind of work that I'm advocating in other parts of this presentation around universal practices, around holistic sets of outcomes. I hadn't been exposed the way I've been exposed the last 8 or 9 years to that. And so my thinking has changed and evolved, and that would have been a part of the process had we been thinking that way. And I've been thinking that way years ago. You'll note the one mentor. We were really intentional that every kid should have what we call an invisible mentor. And the idea of invisible is one of their teachers that they had across their day. And so when kids would bubble up as needing explicit support, we would identify who that invisible mentor would be. And it was always, always, always one of their teachers who knew, and each teacher would have 4 or 5, because not every kid needed the check-in, check-out kind of thing going on every day, but we had kids that did. And so we knew within the day who that teacher was, that for the kids that were struggling, needed that individualized support, who was going to be that mentor, and it happened naturally. Because if I've got 5 or 6 kids, it usually is about one or two per period. Every 1 or 2 per period, that kid got extra attention from that mentor as they went through the day. Anyhow, we like to say, kids need to be known by the name, face, and story. This is one of the ways that at Westview we actually made that happen in a large comprehensive. So I just blew through that, fortunately, just in time, because if I don't get out of here by 2, I'm gonna have to pay $75 for this hotel room that I'm only in until 2. They were gracious enough to let me stay. I ran through all of these, and I'm fairly confident, Lydia, that folks would have access to this PowerPoint. And
yeah, we can share it for sure.
That'd be great. And I'll leave it at that. All done. Questions, thoughts? You're full of caca, Matt. I'll take anything.
You can type questions into the chat or into the Q&A, or there's also the raise hand feature.
Hold on. I just want to illustrate one thing. When I was talking about Westview, Christina DeSanto created with her team, I know it came out of her brain though, I know that, she wouldn't say that, but her team created this thing called Triple C. And the whole focus is on connection, and just an unbelievable space in the day where kids at Rancho Minerva and families have a tight connection with a staff member. And then they did an amazing job with Triple C. I appreciate she brought that up as an example. Definitely a phenomenal example of that. Samantha, yes, a long time ago. It feels like 100 years ago. I think that was pre-pandemic-ish. All right. Somebody mentioned student interviews. I did not say this. When you're talking about individual, basically equitable access at the individual level, use empathy interviews with individual kids. Use them. You've got a kid who's feeling disconnected, not feeling cared for. Ask them, when's the last time you did feel cared for at school? What did you experience? What did you see? What was going on? What were you doing? And then as they identify those C's and those do's, try to figure out how to replicate that in the decisions you're making. Use those to work with the teachers who, and this is people, especially at secondary, don't think about this. Kids spend 85% of their day in classrooms with teachers, with core teachers universally. And so if you've got a kid that's struggling and you can identify, because you just asked them, when you have felt connected, what was going on? If you can replicate that, that is the best evidence to gather and to respond to, and to respond to in terms of how you're going to intervene. So if you're not familiar with empathy interviews, I know we've got a number of resources available through our toolkit. They are very, 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 very powerful in group when you're looking at and trying to figure out what to do for different groups of students, but also with individual access. So sorry, somebody mentioned something about individual interviews. That's why I had to go off on that a little bit. All right. Appreciate everything. Hey, it's crazy out there, right? Even in California, it's like rained as much in California as it has in Oregon. The sun comes out, everybody gets crazy, including the adults. So stay after it. Stay positive. Summer's coming. We promise. Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody.